Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute's presentation of the Wyoming and Gas Fair's 2021 webinar series. Our first webinar today is entitled Wyoming's Oil and Gas Industry, Its Future to the State and Future Directions. We are so pleased to have Wyoming's Chief Executive, Governor Mark Gordon, provide our opening remarks, followed by the man he selected to implement Wyoming's energy policy, Wyoming Energy Authority's inaugural Executive Director, Dr. Glen Murrell. Today's format utilizes the Zoom webinar format. Attendees will be in listen-only mode and be able to ask questions via the chat function. We will receive questions and present them to our speakers in the Q&A section that follows the remarks. Without any delays, please allow me to introduce Wyoming's Chief Executive. Mark Gordon was elected Wyoming's 33rd governor on November 6, 2018. Growing up on the family ranch in Johnson County, Governor Gordon learned the values of hard work and integrity and the importance of working together. As governor, he brings those values to the table in pursuing his commitment that Wyoming continues to be a place where its citizens can pursue their dreams while retaining its unique character. He's a strong believer in Wyoming's ability to chart its own course and a staunch defender of its interests to do so. Governor Gordon is working on efforts to set Wyoming on a sustainable fiscal path and making government more accessible, productive, and efficient. As part of those efforts, Governor Gordon seeks to refocus government to better assist local communities with the tools and resources needed to thrive and to set their own direction. He's also dedicated to ensuring that citizens have access to quality education, including safer schools, advanced degrees, and career and technical educational opportunities. As state treasurer, he led a transformation of the office resulting in improved returns to state investment, better protection of state savings, and increased transparency and access to state financial data for the public. Those efforts to improve transparency surrounding the state's financial portfolio resulted in Wyoming being ranked #1 in the United States for transparency and 3rd in the world among sovereign funds. Please join me in welcoming Wyoming's 33rd governor, the Honorable Mark Gordon. Governor, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Lon, and thank you to everyone at EORI. This is a terrific opportunity, and I always look forward to the chance to visit with you and see what is going on at oil and gas and enhanced oil recovery. You know, I thought what I'd start with is obviously a concern for Wyoming, and that is this Biden leasing ban. You know, they cleverly call it a pause, but in fact, they've canceled 2 quarters of leases, and that hurts all of Wyoming. In fact, it hurts all of the West. One of my initial calls was to a colleague in New Mexico, a Democrat governor, and both of us had the same issues. The ban is hurting our school revenues, it's hurting our state revenues, and it's putting people that really depend on good paying, secure jobs in the oil and gas industry in a pickle. It's hard to imagine that renewable energy jobs will pay the same, and they may not actually have the same sort of lasting ability to make a difference in communities across the West that Wyoming's does. So we are excited that Louisiana, a judge ruled against the Biden administration. We also have a case pending that basically says clearly anybody who wants to study how leasing is being done can do that in a reasonable fashion at the same time that you're proposing new leases. And in fact, one of the points that we've made over and over again to this administration is without having a runway out in front of you, you actually cause greater harm to the environment because companies can't organize themselves to do an efficient leasing program. And the point that I've constantly made is that Wyoming has really led the way. If you look at what we've done on sage grouse, core areas, how we've handled migration corridors, all of this has been done with cooperation of producers, and all of it has been done with the recognition that my former boss, the founder of Apache Corporation, Raymond Plank, said was our requirement to be good stewards of the land. And everyone I know in the industry is a good steward of the land. But let me just talk a little bit about the challenges that the leasing ban and oil and gas, the sort of efforts to slow down oil and gas have meant to Wyoming. It's predicted that in 8 Western states with federal oil and gas leasing programs, we will have investment losses of $2.3 billion in those states. Production value losses of $872 million and tax revenue losses of $345 million in the first year of the moratorium and review. And that's from a study at the University of Wyoming. Now, importantly, it is critical to remember that the production won't decrease. In those Western states, it will simply be moved out of those Western states where we have stringent environmental standards and where we have stringent labor standards and head to places where the requirements are not as strict. So net, you end up with more impact to the environment, and you do what my colleagues and I have been saying, we end up having to buy from our enemies rather than selling to our friends and allies. But you know, this ban has had a really devastating effect this year. The amount of mineral lease revenues this year that we've gotten is 0, and that's because of this de facto moratorium. This absence of revenue is glaring, especially when we're also reeling from the economic devastation of COVID-19. And I'll talk about that a little bit in just a few moments. Let me just say that all of this seems completely unnecessary. Good work was being done under the last administration, and that work could certainly have been carried forward with a review process in place. Any thoughtful, diligent, and meaningful review could be done without stopping an entire leasing program. Yesterday, and Steve, I want to thank you for your help on this, we submitted a cost of carbon or greenhouse gas letter. This is in reference to several efforts on the part of this administration to talk about the social cost of carbon. Now, in that process, they have not looked at the full balance of that, the equation that they have. So they're saying that carbon emissions are in some ways a cost that's associated in externality with development and leasing. That's purely an academic speculation and no more relevant than the speculation about what kind of progress can be made in technology over the number of years. So it's a completely unbalanced view of how technology moves forward and tries to put a squelch on oil and gas development. Now, when I testified in the Senate earlier this year, the question came, well, what about all the excess federal leases that happen here in Wyoming? And the point we made is that the lands in Wyoming are not overly leased. In fact, if you look at the fact that Wyoming has a predominance of federal lands, and a lot of those lands are set aside permanently in national parks and wilderness areas, that minimizes or diminishes the amount that's available. We have probably 39 million oil and gas mineral acres in the state of Wyoming. Approximately 48% of the surface of Wyoming is federally owned, and about 68% of the subsurface mineral acreage is federally owned. So then you subtract the amount that's in the parks and the wilderness areas, and you can see that's substantially less. Of those federal mineral rights, only 9,134,000 acres are currently leased, approximately 34%. Currently available but unleased acreage is about 17,450,000 acres, and that is 66% of those remaining lands. Wyoming is, I say often to my colleagues, really energy central. If you're going to do anything with energy, and Glen knows this, you're going to do it in Wyoming, whether it is oil and gas, whether it's coal, whether it's uranium, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether it's geothermal, or whether it's hydro. All of those are represented here in Wyoming. It is important that these industries have an opportunity to stay viable, because that helps to protect the integrity of communities and doesn't cause the social impacts that happen when you have major migrations of workforce out of state, and then suddenly another rush happens and the migration comes back in. Having a steady development process with a distributed energy supply system is absolutely essential to providing the security this nation needs and providing the economic security that our state needs. We did take advantage of some of the CARES dollar to start to finish off wells that had already gotten started and to do some plug and abandonment. Those CARES dollars help to keep our workforce in place and hopefully allow us to bridge between a time when we saw robust development and a time when we saw really suppressed development from this Biden administration. We've extended that with our Energy Rebound program to make sure that we have workovers, rigs running, plugging and abandonment project, and drilled but uncompleted wells that will be completed. We feel that this is an important step moving us forward to make sure that we have viability in the industry. Let me just finish with a couple of things that are particularly important here because of the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, and that is Wyoming's leadership on carbon dioxide and what we need to do with being able to utilize, sequester carbon dioxide, which when we talk about climate change, of course, people are referring to CO2 in the atmosphere and really stopping fossil development in no way really changes that equation, although there is some conversation about if we stop emitting so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, then we'll start the slow process of natural recovery. What we really need to do is to figure out ways to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And Wyoming really has taken the lead on this with carbon capture and sequestration. And Steve, I think ERI has really been remarkable in the work that they have done in putting Wyoming out in front. To date, I think there are 2 states that have talked about a carbon negative standard in the same interval that a lot of our green counterparts are talking about renewable standards. Republican states are talking about what we can do to really address CO2 in the atmosphere without shooting ourselves in the foot with our energy production. So we'll continue to work to make sure that this administration understands the valuable contribution that can be made with expansion of carbon capture and sequester projects. We'll continue to make sure that our region of the country is a part of the climate solution. Both Doug Burgum in North Dakota and I have expressed our intent to make sure that our states lead that effort. And I think it is interesting to note that actually North Dakota will be using some of the CO2 that is derived here in Wyoming as we go forward. Lastly, let me say that we will not rest to make sure that this administration understands the valuable contribution that oil and gas, coal, indeed all the fossil fuels have as we begin to build out this portfolio, to put some dependency and dependability into the energy supply structure. Right now, I think because of the political forces that are in Washington, there is a facile, not particularly deep understanding of what it takes to do transition. And one of the points that we have made, which is why I believe that oil and gas has a long future, is that the permitting structure, the NEPA process, all of the things to do with rights of way that are going to be required to engage meaningfully in energy transition, those all take time. They're not going to be different for renewable energies than they are for carbon projects. And so it is important that we continue to do the best that we can to improve our industries really right across the spectrum. And with that, Steve, I probably have exceeded my time, but it's been wonderful to have this opportunity to join you. And thank you very much for this great program.
Governor, thank you so much for your leadership and your insights. You have not exceeded your time. We're on your schedule today. And if you're able to stay with us through Glen's comments, would love to be able to do some question and answer with the two of you. I think it would be quite significant for the state and our attendees. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the inaugural executive director of the Wyoming Energy Authority. As the governor has stated, the man that he has chosen to implement his policy, Dr. Glen Murrell. Glen has more than 2 decades of experience in energy-related R&D and technology product development. He holds a doctorate in geology and has contributed to more than 10 publications and several patents related to thermochronology, oil recovery, and technological innovations in the oil and gas production arena. He's held leadership positions in industrial, academic, and public service settings. He's led and contributed to multiple projects related to water flood enhancement, conventional and unconventional EOR, reservoir analytics, and digital rock physics. He has more than a decade of experience in CCUS with emphasis on CO2 EOR and sequestration. His more recent technology interests include energy transition, the hydrogen economy, and blockchain applications. And please join me in welcoming Wyoming Energy Authority's Executive Director, Glen Murrell. Glen, welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Steve. It's always quite a task to follow the governor on some of these panels, so hopefully I do myself justice here. So I'm just going to quickly go through a set of different aspects here, kind of following up on many of the points that the governor made with sort of the substantive thinking behind some of those directions and other things. I'll introduce you all to the Energy Authority a little bit. Perhaps there's people in the audience who are still interested in knowing what the authority exists to do. Spend a bit of time on the energy strategy, how it came about, some of the key aspects of the strategy, and what it means for ultimately what it means for the oil and gas industry as we look forward into the next few decades, as we progress through these challenging times. So first of all, back to me. I started here on July 1st, 2020. I'm a geologist by training and have spent the bulk of my time doing either early stage R&D, mid-level technology development, or late level new product development and introductions, predominantly in the oil and gas business. Worked for the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute from 2007 to 2014, working for Jim Steidman and then later David Moorbacher. Excuse me. I was hired out of there to go and start a lab in CO2 EOR lab in Oklahoma City for GE, the Global Research Center there. They bought Baker Hughes, moved that lab over with them into that during the Baker Hughes merger. That group expanded into reservoir innovation technologies and things like that. And then I was actually caught up in the great layoff of April 2020. And this job here became available and I started applying for it about a week before I got the bad news. So things worked out well. I ended up landing July 1st in this job, which is an incredibly exciting opportunity for me. So the Energy Authority was set up, it came about through the merger of 2 pre-existing authorities, the Infrastructure Authority and the Pipeline Authority. And the mandate of the consequent institution was to secure and sustain the energy economy of Wyoming, which is obviously immense. It's the 3rd largest state energy economy in the country. And if it were a country, it'd be about the same size as that of Norway. It's colossal. And something that's very interesting about, and the governor alluded to it, it's also very diverse. So many of those other economies are based on oil or coal or something else. Wyoming has a very diverse economy in that sense. So it's a very large mandate. And another way of looking at it is we're positioned to be essentially the coordinating hub for all the other activities within the energy space in Wyoming. So Wyoming has a very decentralized agency system with respect to energy. If you contrast it with that in North Dakota or Illinois or even Texas, which have very centralized systems, there are multiple agencies in Wyoming all working in the energy space or touching the energy space. And we exist to make sure that everybody's pulling on the same rope at the same time. And we do that through establishment and communication of the energy strategy. And the energy strategy, it's actually a statutory obligation of ours. We spent the first 9 months of the existence of the WEA working on that. Okay, so, and we spent a good chunk of that time trying to understand what was really going on. Everybody on this call can see it, right? We can see the general decline in coal exports over year on year for the last decade or more. And we're all very, very cognizant of the challenges that a hydrocarbon-based economy sees in 2021. And we wanted to understand really what was going on. So before I get to that point, I diverge a little bit and talk about consumer choice. When consumers are making decisions about what to buy, maybe a Ford versus a Ferrari, they consider 3 factors. The first one is cost, right? And clearly there's a differentiating factor there, Ford versus Ferrari. The next thing is convenience. So how well does this product meet one's needs? And the third factor is quality. And typically people are willing to pay a premium for quality. So how does that pertain to energy? Well, one thing that is very interesting is that we're currently living in a world of energy abundance. So we've become very, very good at producing energy and delivering it. Consequent to that, the price of energy, the cost of energy is actually very, very cheap across the board. Whether it doesn't matter what energy product you're really looking at, it is very, very cheap. And you can use the coal example every day. $12 a ton, it is literally cheaper than dirt. You can buy building aggregate it costs more than coal. So price or cost is not a differentiating factor anymore. Okay, so forget that. It's also very convenient. You hit the switch and the lights come on. Or within a 5-mile radius of my home here, there are probably 5 or 6 gas stations. I can also go to Walmart or Safeway and get propane. Energy is very, very cheap and it's very, very convenient to access. So the third factor, quality, is what people are making decisions based on. And in their minds, a quality aspect of energy is the emissions profile. So our problem statement, what we're really dealing with today is that consumers are making choices based on the emissions profile of their energy. They're essentially, consumers want low emissions energy. That's our problem statement. And governments and energy providers are hearing them and they're listening to them and they're acting on it. So, so that's the problem statement. So back to the strategy. Every strategy needs some sort of unifying objective. What is the primary goal of what we're all working towards? And for Wyoming, we established this about December timeframe, and then we did a bit of internal checks with our partners, the Governor's Office and the Joint Minerals Committee and others, to make sure that our unifying objective was something we all wanted to pursue, and we got consensus on that. The unifying objective is Wyoming needs to continue powering the nation within all of the above net zero energy mix, and I'll break that down a little bit. So powering the nation is something we've done for decades. Wyoming has contributed to the well-being and standard of living of literally hundreds of millions of Americans over the last 4 or 5 decades. And that's not an exaggeration, that's factual. So we need to continue doing that. It's something we're very, very good at, and we should embrace that, and we should be recognized for that in terms of the contribution we've done for the standard of living of millions of Americans. We will pursue an all of the above mix. We're not going to pick winners. We cannot reinforce silos within the energy sector. It needs to be hydrocarbon and renewable and uranium and all the other things in between. We need to be able to leverage and recognize the rich natural resource endowment that Wyoming has and take advantage of it. The key point though is net zero, and we chose net zero deliberately. We did not choose low emissions or low carbon because they're quite constraining. A net zero aspiration is far more flexible in its aspiration. It allows us to have parts of the economy overall that are emitting, have emissions, other parts act as sinks. And what we're trying to get to is a balance where those emissions are balanced with those sink side. It's a much more flexible and powerful position to take. So our unifying objective, again, powering the nation with an all of the above net zero mix. So the other part of a strategy is that you have to have strategic pillars, right? So, or swim lanes or roadmaps, or there's a lot of sort of jargon out there about what you're trying to do. Basically, it's the areas that are in bounds in terms of which to play. Now, for us, the primary one is our heritage resources. I mentioned that earlier, and particularly if we're going for an all of the above mix and to continue the power in the nation, we have to leverage all of our heritage products. So it's hydrocarbons and renewables. We're going to embrace them all. And we have to, but the one thing we have to accept is that our consumers, referring back to that problem statement, they want low emissions. So we need to address that aspect of our heritage production. So for that reason, CCUS has been a prevalent part of our work for a decade or more, and it becomes more and more important on a day-to-day basis that we find a way to commercialize and deploy it. We've done a tremendous amount of work. We have to figure out how do we get it into the field. And there's also a little bit of a tweak. So we have been extremely focused on CCUS as a mitigation technology for thermal coal. But the problem statement is not that people want CCUS. The problem statement is people want low emissions energy. And so we're working hard with our agencies to make sure that the breadth of their vision is much wider than that. So otherwise we get a little bit too focused on one technology. If you broaden your solution space, things like hydrogen become more interesting. Things like BECCS, biomass driven with CCUS, that becomes more interesting as well. Both of those technologies are enabled by CCUS, but CCUS is not the solution in and of itself. So it's a little bit of a tweak in our philosophy to make sure that our solution space can adequately position ourselves moving forward. Electrification is very, very important as well. It's the second pillar of our work. Electrification recognizes that the shape of energy demand in the future is going to become more and more based on electricity. The delivery and consumption of electricity is really where the economy is moving on a sort of decadal time frame. You think electric vehicles. I also read recently about electric airplanes in New Zealand, of all places, that they're starting to push these things out. And that is going to be very important for Wyoming because our natural resources are solids, liquids, and gases. So we have to be cognizant of that change and understand that when we deliver our products to market, it has to be delivered as electricity or in some other form, some other energy carrier that is readily converted to electricity, which is another reason why hydrogen is very interesting, because hydrogen fuel cells, it is a fairly simple transition. So overall, you have to think about how to deliver our product in a way that is convenient, i.e. electricity or some other carrier close to electricity, and desirable, i.e. decarbonized. So those are our two challenges moving forward. The third pillar that we have to focus on is technology. I 100% agree with the governor's position on this. I've worked in technology all my life, and technology has proven over and over and over again its ability to solve societal and market problems quite readily. If it's enabled to in a free market economy, technology typically steps in strongly and it can take care of those issues. The other thing is technology is a critical factor for adding value to products. And that's another challenge for Wyoming. Wyoming, doesn't matter where you look, oil, gas, coal, forestry, agriculture, trona, it's all very short, very linear value chains. Extract it, transport it, consume it. And we need to get beyond that. We're thinking more about, more in economic development terms here, of course, but technology helps you do that as well. It's a very, very challenging issue, of course, but that's one of the powerful attributes of technology overall. We also need to, there are actually real examples right now where we're faced with that. The rare earth elements opportunity in Wyoming is enormous. The Powder River Basin coal, the Bear Lodge prospect also, very rich rare earth elements prospects. But we're already seeing it, that our emphasis there is perhaps a little too traditional in its scope. Extract it and ship it to market. We need to get beyond that. We need to deploy technology so that we're not just extracting and shipping, we're extracting and upscaling and adding value through battery construction or whatever it is, battery manufacturing, and so adding value to our economy overall. So the strategy is it's a very evergreen strategy. It's never going to be finished. It's going to be continually evolving. It has to, because the economy today moves at such a rapid pace that having a static strategy would be a problem, right? So our strategy has to evolve as markets, technology, society changes with it, okay? So we're not going to wait for our strategy to be finished in order to kick off initiatives. So there are two big ones we're following right now. Hydrogen is a massive opportunity. The Wyoming has about 25% of the nation's natural resources, sort of feedstock resources for hydrogen production in the country is located in Wyoming. Mostly it's around coal and natural gas, but it includes very rich, renewable green hydrogen feedstock as well. So it's a little known fact, the next biggest is Texas, I believe. So about 25% of the natural hydrogen feedstock exists in Wyoming. We also have abundant infrastructure. We have a lot of export infrastructure, east, west, and south. A lot of an established CO2 management system is right here in the state as well. Very, very well positioned. Should hydrogen take off and become a real industry, Wyoming is very, very well positioned to take advantage of it. The other big initiative we're pursuing is sequestration as a service. The idea there is to facilitate in some way, whether it's through taking care of the long-term stewardship or establishing public-private partnerships to get over that sort of capital hump, finding a way to get sequestration established in the state as a viable and vibrant industry. The reason we're focused on sequestration is that if we establish that in the state, it benefits all the emitters. Every emitter in the state, and perhaps even outside of the state, benefits from having that infrastructure and that industry established in the Wyoming. So that is our focus specifically. Other initiatives we've already kicked off with specific to oil and gas. We're also commissioning a Class 6 well permitting guidance. So it's basically a project management guide for Class 6 wells. That is kicked off literally earlier this week. We're looking to establish a quarterly oil and gas market outlook. So we're going to hire a third-party marketing company and we'll establish, it's going to be a subscription-based system where we will just be pushing out information on a quarterly basis, helping Wyoming operators understand prices, rates, other trends that are going on in the oil and gas space. We supported late last year an unconventional reservoir enhanced oil recovery project with a professor from the University of Wyoming. That project, the private partner dropped out, but the funding is still in place should that professor find a new partner to work with. Was really happy to support Dr. Carpenter and the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute for the Rocks to Reservoirs program, which looked to support innovative, mostly it was sort of digital rock physics based projects around core sampling in the state. Great partner to be working with Enhanced Recovery Institute on that. The lease moratorium that was mentioned earlier by the governor, we administered that study. We also supported a coal bed methane fugitive methane study, which is done late last year as well. We also supported Western States Tribal Nations LNG study, which was published only a matter of weeks ago. So continued efforts to keep pushing us forward and try to address the challenges that the oil and gas industry has. So for my final topic, talking about what does net zero mean for oil and gas. Okay, so there's no doubt that it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge, particularly for oil. So if you think about coal or gas, coal, the great opportunity is the establishment of pre or post combustion CCUS. That is the one opportunity that we're faced with. For natural gas, it's mostly hydrogen and conversion to that, and perhaps synthetic methane. But right now, hydrogen seems to be the great play. If you can think about oil, there's no clear, crystal clear opportunity for how to move forward through this energy transformation. And I chose energy transformation deliberately. I'm not such a believer in the energy transition. Transition means you're going from one thing to another and leaving that other stuff behind. I think it's more of a transformation going from hydrocarbon to decarbonized, which means that there is a place, certainly a place for hydrocarbon products in the future. But back to the topic, for oil, it's challenging. It is really difficult. And yet we have multiple operators and OFS companies as well, who are very, very bullish on becoming a net zero oil company of the future. You think about BP is one, Baker Hughes as well. So what are they doing? How are they doing it? Well, a lot of it pivots around the concept of realizing value in that decarbonization attribute of their production. Okay, so you can look at some of the examples from BP and Oxy, where they have actually managed to sell shipments of net zero oil. And they've achieved that through a combination of things. A lot of it is enhanced oil recovery and coupled with some form of offset. All right, so the classic sort of example right now is you'd use CO2 enhanced oil recovery to get the oil out of the ground, and perhaps you do direct air capture as well as an offset system. So ultimately you end up with a net zero product. And the cost of that effort is being offset by the premium that people are willing to pay for net zero oil. And that's really interesting because it demonstrates that people still recognize that having a high energy density liquid is really, really powerful in a modern economy like that in North America and elsewhere. In any developed economy, that commodity has immense value. And if you can decarbonize it or reach that net zero level, then people are willing to pay considerably a massive premium for that product moving forward. Another example, you can look to our colleagues up there in the Pinedale region who are pursuing very, very hard low emissions production standards out there. In the same way, they recognize that the value is there. If they can produce that with the lowest carbon intensity they possibly can, they preserve their market access and they get a premium back. So that's what's driving those decisions. We're seeing that cost is starting to get recognized even in commercial models. It's not necessarily a pure net present value calculation anymore. I've heard recently that people are now adding CH4 per barrel. Methane per barrel is one of the metrics that goes into these commercial models moving forward. And so they're trying to assign a cost to that aspect of their production. So these are real things. One example, which is perhaps my favorite, and perhaps hopefully some of these operators are actually on the phone today, the cryptocurrency mining based off flaring. That is, I mean, it's cool. It's really cool stuff just to start with, right? But when you think about what they're actually doing, it's even more fascinating. What they're actually doing is they're directly monetizing a reduction in emissions. They're going from methane to CO2, and they're turning that directly into money through cryptocurrency. And it took me a while to realize this. I used to work on this at a previous job, and we never made that leap. I wish we had. But the way that they're doing that is really inspirational. I think it's a fascinating key to it. Just a couple more points to go, Steve. The one thing, just want to plug another meeting, actually. The Petroleum Association of Wyoming, the annual meeting, P.W. Mueller is having a panel addressing these very issues. And we're hoping, we're working together on getting somebody in to talk about revenue generation in a carbon constrained oil and gas economy. So that will be, so keep an eye out for that. I think it'll be a very interesting discussion. My last point is that I do not want to trivialize the challenge. Everything I just said sounds rosy and easy. It's not. It's really, really hard. I do not want people to think that I am not serious about this. But the alternative is far, far worse. If we try to continue to operate in a business as usual fashion and not recognize the desires of our consumers, that's far more difficult to deal with on a 10 to 20 year timescale. So it's challenging, but there is a path forward, and it's being demonstrated by various operators out there already. There are opportunities to generate extra revenue. There are opportunities to improve and sustain the oil and gas business moving forward. With that, Steve, I'll pause and hand it back to you.
Thank you so very much, Glenn. I appreciate your insights, and would now invite Governor Gordon and you to join me. We've got a couple questions. I'll start with you, Governor Gordon, first, and open it up to Glenn and vice versa as we go forward. But with the recent announcement of the TerraPower Natrium Reactor team with Rocky Mountain Power, we received a question, any insight as to how that might affect or impact the oil and gas industry in Wyoming, positively or negatively?
Well, thanks, Steve, and thanks for the question. I think there really probably is less of an impact on oil and gas than almost anything else we could think about. The impact is going to be indirect in that I think Glenn spoke about the advent of electric vehicles and what that might do in terms of transportation. We do know that there are short hop airplanes now that are electrified and so on. So I think there'll be a general decline over time, but nothing really replaces oil and gas in that spectrum. Electric vehicles are certainly making a major sort of push at this point, and they perhaps can reduce demand. I think Glenn spoke a little bit about the consumer demand and what consumers are going to require from products they buy, and I think Glenn is probably correct. Right now, however, I think that the ability to transform the infrastructure, there are two main impediments to that. One is just, as I spoke about, the NEPA process and the permitting processes that have been litigated over the last several years to really slow down or stop projects on a regular basis. That process is in place and will make it hard for us to move quickly to newer technologies. And then I think significantly, when we look at technology and technological advancement, clearly microgrids are going to have a role to play, and you're going to have major utilities like Rocky Mountain Power that are going to resist microgrids, that are local grids on the ground.
Right.
They want to sell transmission. Their economic model is moving away from generation more to finding a pipeline infrastructure in the form of electric transmission, and they will hate to lose that market. So I think that all of those factors together mean that we'll probably still see oil and gas predominantly on the roadways for some time. There will be improvements in efficiency. So I don't want to minimize as much as Glenn has also said he doesn't want to minimize.
Right.
There are challenges ahead, but I do see a long transition time.
Thank you, sir. Glenn, second question directed to you. You mentioned a centralized sequestration, a CCUS facility in Wyoming. The question that was raised, could that happen? You've obviously indicated that that's your desire to do. Can you talk for a minute about some details, your timing, your planning, and how you see that coming to fruition, and how long it would take to come to fruition?
Yeah, so you're right. That is exactly what we're envisioning. If we can develop some sort of hub structure, right? Hub infrastructure to offer that back as a service to whoever needs it. So immediately there are already operators who are trying to do it on a purely commercial basis, right? Just trying to do it privately, commercially. But they're faced with the challenges, and typically it's associated with the Class 6 rule in terms of the long-term stewardship and liability issue. So that's one thing we need to take care of. And we have actually establishing some working groups currently to see what the best approach is for Wyoming in that sense. Is it a policy step forward where the state somehow builds a liability pool or adopts what North Dakota is doing? Great examples. Or is it maybe we establish a public-private partnership working with the authority, and the authority takes on the long-term stewardship issue, and the operator works in a purely operational risk world. So we're kicking around. We have not determined what is the best path forward, but we hope to actually make suggestions or recommendations to the legislature and in late August timeframe with respect to what to do there. And be moving forward, at least on the policy side, as fast as we can from that point on. And in terms of actually establishing that public-private partnership, that could actually happen pretty quickly, and it could also be facilitated by the fact that the authority has bonding authority. We can issue bonds and use the proceeds ourselves directly. So that's a bit more of a long-term aspect if that's the right way to go forward.
Wonderful. Governor Gordon, any comments or follow-on to the sequestration as a service?
Well, thanks, Steve, and thanks, Glenn. I also see that sequestration has to develop more of a marketplace. Right now, as I said, it's we're buying abstention. You check the box if you want to give a little extra to promote wind development or whatever, with the assumption that that somehow represents reductions in carbon dioxide, which it doesn't. What really does do that is trying to figure out a way to build a marketplace around genuine carbon sequestration, whether it be geologic or whether it be agricultural practices, better silviculture, because I think, as everyone on this Zoom knows, whether a tree is decaying in the West or whether it's burning up, it is oxidizing and emitting. So if we do a better job of silviculture, a better job of incorporating that in BECS, then we actually have a better way of getting ahead of this problem.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Another question that I'm going to ask both of you, but I'm going to preempt it a little bit. The question is, with oil and natural gas prices rising in 2021, why hasn't the aggressive drilling program reappeared in Wyoming? And I would caveat that by saying, at least at EORI, we're seeing a significant uptick. We're seeing a lot more work happening. So the question may be, why doesn't it appear that that's happening? And I would argue that it probably is, but open to either of you. I'll start with you, Governor. Any comments on your view of the resurgence of drilling with coming out of COVID?
Well, I think all of us that have been involved in the industry know it takes a certain amount of effort to mobilize.
Right.
You don't want to mobilize unless you have some clear runway ahead of you. And with this Biden ban, that is really remains very unclear. So it is hobbling the industry. The relocation of capital out of states with federal lands to either countries offshore or states that don't have those same constraints. That's what's really going on. So I think we are seeing a bit of a resurgence. It's just not happening in the West, where apparently this administration feels it's better to industrialize our landscape with wind generation rather than having what has been a proven technology and actual cooperation with producers to make sure that we have a sensitive way of developing our oil and gas.
Wonderful. Glenn, any follow-on thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and Governor Gordon's completely correct. Yeah, the regulatory uncertainty and concern there is certainly hampering a lot of that. There's a few other things going on as well. Demand is actually still a little soft. It hasn't recovered quite yet there. There's also a little bit of technical oversupply. So they're still drawing down on storage. They ramped up storage massively right at this time last year. They'd been drawing that down a little bit over time since that point. And there's also quite a few ducts out there, so drilled but not completed. Those are being completed. There's also just shut-in wells that are being brought back in. So there's a little bit of technical oversupply, demand is soft, and the regulatory uncertainty is certainly hampering it as well. Currently, I think we're about 60% of pre-pandemic times on rig count. Wyoming's in the 50 to 55% of pre-pandemic. So yeah, Wyoming's lagging, probably because that regulatory impact is felt a little harder here in Wyoming versus elsewhere.
Wonderful, thank you. I've got one final question that I'll ask both of you, and then go in reverse order to Glenn and the Governor for any final concluding thoughts. And this is your chance not to put on your crystal ball and your forward-thinking hat and say, this is what I think is going to happen, but put on your hat and say, what do you want to have happen? And the question is, what's the future of oil and gas in 2030 and 2050? What is your vision? Governor, you set the vision, and then I'll ask Glenn, how does he implement that? If you could control everything, what would you like to see the oil and gas industry look like in Wyoming, a decade from now and 3 decades from now?
Well, thanks, Steve. So, a decade from now, we know the amazing technological advances that have happened in the industry over the last several years, and the impact that drilling used to bring to the landscape and to wildlife populations is significantly reduced. And so in 20 years, I would anticipate seeing that technological improvement continue. I see that with we may not use as much oil and gas for transportation as we have in the past, but its ability as raw material for things like advanced building materials, lightening up vehicles, strengthening infrastructure. I think all of that can bring a certain amount of resurgence in Wyoming. And in particular, I would love to see value added, sort of been a quest for Wyoming over the many years. How do we add value to the raw products that we produce here? And I look to see that industry grow. I don't see it diminishing too much, Steve. Oil and gas has been here since before statehood. We care deeply about the industry, and I think there's a bright future here for it.
Wonderful. Glenn, you get the hard part of how do you make that materialize, but I'll also let you say what you think as well, if you'd like.
I think my thought reflects that of the governor. I think oil and gas is not going away. It's too much of a high quality product to start with, right? The oil, to your point, has a ton of downstream applications which make it such a valuable point, right? And you mentioned the example earlier when you can help people are so willing to pay a high premium for net zero oil, and because of that reason, it is so useful. It's so many downstream uses. So so I agree completely on that. I agree with the added value aspect too. Another aspect is oil and gas, particularly oil, is a global commodity, right? So that actually helps because it makes it a little bit more resilient to local sort of influences. But how to do it is, I think I've got to go back to the point earlier where I've moved beyond this idea of we're going through an energy transition. That is seriously negative in context of hydrocarbon to the renewables, and it is spoken about by many people who don't quite understand that. To the governor's point, that build out is the scale of that build out is extremely difficult to realize, right? Where you do a little bit of quick math, and the aspiration of converting all the thermal generation in the country to renewable generation means that you'd have to build 2 to 3 of those, the Roadhouse wind farm projects just out of Cheyenne. You'd have to commission 2 or 3 of those every week for the next 15 years in order to reach that aspiration, right? So put aside the engineering challenge, the societal challenge is just as large. And that you're talking about covering an area greater than that of California with wind turbines in order to do that. So I agree. I think that aspiration is simply non-tenable. And we're starting to see certain corporate actors quietly admit that. You won't read about it in the press, but they're quite happy to chat about it behind closed doors, that they realize that as well, and why they are investing heavily in CCUS and other things. And that technology is how the oil and gas industry is going to progress through the 2030 and 2050 timeframe. Like I mentioned earlier, natural gas, it is decarbonized either through post-combustion capture or through pre-combustion and conversion to hydrogen. That's the great opportunity there. For oil, it is more about increasing. You're probably going to see an increase in the advent of CO2 enhanced for recovery, not simply driven purely by productivity enhancement, but the other aspect of CO2 sequestration associated with it, and the advent of increased offset technologies like carbon removal, direct air capture, offset through agriculture, things like that. Many of those technologies that seek to reduce the carbon intensity. But long term, oil and gas ain't going away.
Awesome. That's a wonderful note. I won't make that be your last final thought, but opportunity for a last comment or a final thought from you, Glenn, if you have any.
Oil and gas ain't going away. I'm going to repeat it because it's worth
repeating.
I like it. It is oil and gas has a long-term, it has a future for certain. But again, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to trivialize it. It's going to be a challenge. We've got a lot of hard work to get through. The opportunity is there, though. Oil and gas has a future, and it's going to be a serious and important part of Wyoming's economy moving forward.
Wonderful. Governor Gordon, final thoughts. Governor, we can't hear you.
Thank you. I would tie
there you go. There you go.
There is no question that climate is an urgent consideration. And it's clear that Wyoming is way out in the lead. The solutions are found here. And I think that the opportunity for technological advancement is going to be substantial. If we are going to truly address climate change, it really has to take a concerted effort, not just some sort of blasé, let somebody else stop doing what they're doing and it'll all be good. We have to seize the moment, and we really can do it here in Wyoming. And I think the work of EORI is right on point there.
Very much appreciate that. Governor, I can't think of a better inaugural effort than the leader of our state and the leader of our oil and gas industry and his person to implement that, to be joining us today. Greatly appreciate both of your time and spending a few minutes with us today. This will be recorded for anyone else to come back and view at their leisure. And again, greatly appreciate your time with us today and appreciate everyone's attendance. Thank you all.
My pleasure.
Thank you.